seeing this, because it says in Scripture that the Pharisees had to go around saying, "Crucify him, crucify him, crucify him." All right, am I back?
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
So, the crowds would have been silenced. The Pharisees would have been shouting, "Crucify," trying to get them ramped up because they did not want the crowds to have sympathy and mercy. They wanted Jesus to die here and now. So they started shouting, "Crucify, crucify," trying to get the crowds to follow them, and they did. And again, Isaiah 52 is a prophecy about the suffering servant Messiah. And it says, his face was disfigured beyond recognition, meaning that those who knew Jesus would not have been able to recognize that that was Jesus outside of Pilate saying, "Here he is." It goes on to say that his body was so badly damaged that you could not tell if he was male or female. Remember, at this flogging, he was naked. The whip would have been going around. He would have been shredded up down there, and you would not have been able to tell male or female. Now, a side note about this crowd. This is most likely the same crowd who was just shouting, "Hosanna, Hosanna to the Son of David." They were just praising him the other day, and now they're shouting, "Crucify him." We were just praising you, but never mind. Kill him instead. And again, Pilate is so confused. He's been found innocent by two leaders. He's been found to have no fault, to be completely blameless. He was hoping that this intense flogging would shock sense into people, but it's not. He does not understand the evil at play here. So he ends up washing his hands. And he says, "I'm done. I'm not doing this. I'm washing my hands of this. I'm clean of this." And the Jews shouted out, "Let his blood be upon us and our children." And Pilate, in another book, says, "Take him and crucify him yourself." He did not want to do this. Because remember, he still had the thought of his wife's dream running through his head. And that's whenever the Pharisees said, "He has to die, for he claims to be the Son of God." And when Pilate heard that, he became terrified. And it says he took Jesus and dragged him back inside and asked, "Where are you from?" A lot of people don't understand why he would ask that. Because as a Roman official, mind you, this is only 30 years prior that Herod the Great slaughtered the innocents because of a Jewish prophecy that the Messiah was coming. Pilate would have known that. And on top of that, again, they're polytheistic. They believed that the gods mated with humans. And if it was proven over all of the signs he did that he actually was, Pilate would have viewed it as a son of a god, the Jewish god. The last thing he would want to do is anger a God that is present and visible and has made himself known countless times. He did not want a God that active on him. He was terrified. He would have known the messianic prophecies of where the Jewish Messiah, Mashiach, would be born. That's why he said, "Where are you from?" He was trying to get an answer. But Jesus did not respond, because if Jesus responded and said where he actually came from, Pilate would have reason to say, "No, you're not getting crucified today. I don't care if there's a riot. I don't care if there's bloodshed. I'm not killing you. I'm not allowing you to die." And that, again, is not the mission of Jesus. He did not come all that way through all that pain just to stop there. So Pilate goes back outside and hands him over to the religious leaders to take him and be crucified. So with the walk, it's known as the Via Dolorosa, which is called the sorrowful walk, or the sorrowful way, and it's the path Jesus would have taken through the city and out of the gate. Now, a lot of people believe he would have carried the entire cross on his shoulder, but there have been many archaeological digs of crucifixion sites that show the crosses were more designed like this. And instead, the crucifixion victims would be carrying the crossbeam, which still would have weighed about 100 pounds, would have been the size of like a railroad tie, almost. And they would have tied the arms to the crossbeam. They did this as further punishment, because if the victim would have tripped and fallen, they can't catch themselves. So if they fell backwards, they would fall onto their back. If they fell forwards, they have an extra 100 pounds on top of them. They would either hit their face into the ground or have an extra 100 pounds on their knees. It was an extra layer of torture and torment that the Romans were masters at doing. They were masters at causing as much pain as possible without killing the person. You can actually take the same walk Jesus did today if you go to Jerusalem. And a healthy person takes about 15 minutes to do that walk. We had to remember, Jesus had just been flogged. His insides were bare to the air, and he had to carry an extra 100-pound rough cross. This would not be something polished. This would be very rough, splintery, on top of his shoulders that would have been torn open. Which explains why he was constantly falling, because again, he had low blood pressure. If you've ever had low blood pressure, you get extremely dizzy very, very easily. That's why they had to have Simon come up and help him, because they realized he's taking forever, because he's not going to do that walk in 15 minutes. The Romans wanted to get this done with and go about their day. They didn't want to take all day long just to see this prisoner walk up along this road. So that's why they called Simon over, forced him to carry the cross. And as they got to Golgotha, they would have taken the straps off, put the beam on the ground, and they would not have thrown him, but they would not have been gentle. A lot of movies and shows depict as being gently placing him on the cross. They would not have. They would have more along the lines of tripped him downwards or shoved him down, and while on the ground, they would have stretched his arms out, tied roughly right around here. And again, a lot of depictions show the nail going through the hand right there. But medically, that's not possible to hold somebody up. It would have torn right through the hand as soon as he got positioned on top of the cross. And if you look at the Hebrew definition of hand, it includes from here up. And right here are a series of bones. That's almost like a bone lock. And if you pierce it with a nail, it would hold somebody perfectly in place. It would feel like the person's bones are going to snap, but they don't. And as you can see in the photo, the nails would have been at least 7 inches, if not longer. They would have been almost like railroad spikes. And again, the Romans were masters at what they did. They knew that right here, there's not only an artery, but right next to it is a tendon. And they knew exactly where to pierce the wrist to avoid the artery, but hit the tendon. And in a medical journal, it says that tendon that got pierced through would have recoiled all the way up the arm and into the shoulder. And he said that tendon is the same tendon if you ever hit your elbow, your funny bone. Yeah, and he said the pain level that he would have been experiencing is if you hit your elbow on purpose to find that nerve, that tendon, isolated it, took pliers, grabbed it, and started twisting as hard as you can. He said that would be a small fraction of what Jesus would have felt. And again, at the feet, they would have positioned his feet. Because again, before even the feet, he was dangling there. His shoulders would have dislocated at that point. As soon as they connected the cross, he would have dropped down. And that's whenever they would attach the feet. And just like in the wrists, the feet had a very similar nerve. And they would nail the spike right through that. And again, on both feet, it would shoot up his legs. In both the arms and the feet, that kind of trauma would cause your arm muscles to twitch and quiver, and your legs to twitch and quiver. It would be nearly impossible to support yourself without those tendons there. Now on the next slide, it shows the positioning that he would have been on the cross. As you can see, his shoulders would have been dislocated. And the way that archaeological crosses are built is that's the positioning he would have been at, mainly because if you are at the side, it crunches up one of your lungs and makes it harder to breathe. And if you all would, I want to do a little exercise. You see, on this cross, he would have been stuck in the inhale position. So I want us all to take a breath in and hold it for as long as we can. I have asthma, I can't last that long. Now, if you wanted to exhale, you would have had to pull up on dislocated shoulders, scraping your ribs and spine against the splintered wood of the cross, and balancing yourself on the nails through your wrists as it feels like your entire wrist bone is going to snap. Every breath, you had to pull yourself up to exhale. That includes speaking as well, because Jesus spoke on this cross. And that would have required him to hold himself in that position with a strength that only a carpenter could have had. Only divine intervention could have given him that level of strength to hold himself up to speak long statements. So oftentimes we just view this as Jesus was on the cross. We don't know what he was thinking. We don't know what he was feeling, but we do. Again, a messianic prophecy written in Psalm 22. I want to read it here just for a moment. That's part of it. It says, I am poured out like water, and all my bones are disjointed. My heart is like wax melting within me. My strength is dried up like baked clay. My tongue sticks to the roof of my mouth. You put me into the dust of death. You see, this was written 1,000 years before this moment. And it shows that Jesus' heart, have you ever been so just terrified that it feels like your heart is about to jump out of your chest, like it's about to melt? That's the analogy there. Your heart is like wax melting within him. And you see, there weren't, there was nothing that the Pharisees could have said. We still don't know he's the Son of God. He's just a blasphemer. God provided signs. It says from noon until 3, the sun was darkened. And there's actually, I read an article from NASA, they were able to backdate solar eclipses based on the schedule of them. And they said at this exact moment in ancient Israel, there would have been what's known as a massive solar eclipse. Science proved the Bible right then and there. And you see, back then, they viewed solar eclipses as God's judgment. Now the Pharisees, in their ego, would have seen it as God casting his judgment against Jesus, but in reality, it was casting his judgment against them, for they are killing his son. And what's beautiful is while on the cross, Jesus says what's known as his final 7 statements. And I find each one to be beautiful in its own right. So the first 3 were done roughly in the first 3 hours because he was on the cross for 6 hours. And the final 4 is believed to have been in the final 3 hours. So shortly after being crucified, he said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they're doing." Again, here Jesus is teaching us. He's surrounded by people who are literally killing him, and he's still praying to God, forgive them. Not curse them, not punish them, but forgive them. He's still trying to teach the people around him before he's dead. His second one is to the thief on the cross, and this one is one of my favorite statements by him because it highlights deathbed confessions, deathbed conversions to Christianity, and it's a hot button issue in some Christian circles. But one of the thieves and criminals next to him were mocking him. The other one chastised him and said, "This man is innocent. We deserve to be here, but he does not." And he looked at Jesus and said, "Father, remember me. The Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom." He didn't ask Jesus, "Please save me. Get me off from this cross. Whenever you get into your kingdom, pull me on with you." He simply said, "Remember me." He had that much faith and trust in God. And God looked at him and said, "Truly I tell you, this day you will be with me in paradise." You see, I love this verse especially because it reminds me of my mom. To kind of go off on a tangent here, she lived a very sinful life. Wasn't adulterous, loved other men other than my dad, loved to party, didn't believe in God. She lived a life of sin just like this thief. But at the end, on hospice, I read the gospel, I shared the good news with her, and the next day after leaving my Bible and some verses with her, I came back and she had this peace. She said, "You're never going to believe what I did. Last night I read the verses that you gave me and I prayed for the first time in so long and I said, I'm sorry. I don't deserve any of this. I'm dying of cancer. I don't deserve your mercy, but I'm asking you to please be my Savior." She said at that moment she felt intense peace that she's never felt throughout all of hospice. And that's exactly how I imagine this thief on the cross was. I feel that just for a moment, he forgot the pain of his own crucifixion. And then you had Jesus looking down at his mother, who was nearby, it says, and I imagine Mary would have been close by, and he said, "Dear woman, here is your son," looking at the Apostle John. And looking at John, he said, "Here is your mother." See, even in death, he's still trying to be a good son and looking out for his mother. But imagine being Mary in this moment. She was so close to her son, but she might have been a mile away. If she tried coming up to the cross, the soldiers would have stopped her. If she would have tried taking him down, they would have most likely killed her. She could not do anything but stand there and watch. And being a parent myself, I imagine she was having flashes. Seeing him up there on the cross and then flashing back to him taking his first steps. Or flashing back to holding him in her arms as he was a newborn baby. Just the pain and grief that she would have felt knowing she could not help her son. Then you had Jesus here saying, "John, take care of her. watch over her. And scholars believe that is why John was the only apostle not martyred. He lived and died of old age. And people believe it's because Jesus wanted to ensure somebody was there to care for his mother. And then we come to the final 3 hours, where it's recorded that Jesus shouted out, "Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani," which translates to, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Or in some translations, it says, "abandoned me." This has several layers because, one, the Pharisees would have known exactly what he was talking about. You see, back then, they didn't say, "Oh, I love Psalm 22," or "Oh, I love Psalm 101." No, they would have said the first line of that psalm. And the first line of Psalm 22 is, my God, why have you abandoned me?" Which would have stirred the memories in their minds because the Pharisees memorized all the scriptures. They would have known exactly what Jesus was referencing here. So, I want to read at least part of what he was referencing. Psalm 22 says, my God, why have you abandoned me? Why are you so far away when I groan for help? Every day I call to you, my God, but you do not answer. Every night you hear my voice, but I find no relief. Yet you are holy, enthroned on the praises of Israel. Our ancestors trusted in you, and you rescued them. They cried out to you and were saved. They trusted in you and were never disgraced. But I am a worm and not a man. I am scorned and despised by all. Everyone who sees me mocks me. They sneer and shake their heads, saying, is this the one who relies on the Lord? Then let the Lord save him. If the Lord loves him so much, let the Lord rescue him. That is important because that is exactly what the people in the crowd are shouting out to him. If you are the Messiah, get off the cross. If God loves you so much, he'll take you down. It continues and said, yet you brought me safely from my mother's womb and led me to trust you at my mother's breast. I was thrust into your arms at my birth. You have been my God from the moment I was born. Do not stay so far from me, for trouble is near, and no one else can help me. My enemies surround me like a herd of bulls. Fierce bulls of Bashan have hemmed me in. Like lions, they open their jaws against me, roaring and tearing into their prey. My life is poured out like water, and all my bones are out of joint. My heart is like wax melting within me. My strength has dried up like sun-baked clay. My tongue sticks to the roof of my mouth. You have laid me into the dust of death. My enemies surround me like a pack of dogs. An evil gang closes in on me. They have pierced my hands and feet. I can count all my bones. And my enemies stare at me and gloat, and they divide my garments among themselves and cast lots for my clothing. The casting lots was exactly what the Roman soldiers started to do as soon as Jesus was crucified. They fulfilled that prophecy and they didn't even know it. A lot of people are confused about the bulls of Bashan. Bashan is not a country anymore. It's not a region anymore. It's been renamed to Golan Heights, if you look over there. It's an area east of the Jordan River. And it was essentially an ancient land full of bulls and full of evil men. It was referenced in the Old Testament of a giant warrior king named Og from Bashan. And Bashan at that time was often used to represent people of evil heart or people who were against God, and was often correlated with demonic presences. So from this prophecy, it tells us that one, he was surrounded by evil people. You had to think the Sanhedrin was there, judging him, mocking him. The Roman soldiers were the ones that tortured him and crucified him. The crowd that was just praising him was now shouting for his death. And this prophecy shows the spiritual realm that we cannot see. You know, by being in demonic forces, the bulls of Bashan are surrounding him. Satan would have most likely been there, and he would have thought, finally, I have victory. I'm killing the Son of God. Humans can never be restored. He didn't know how wrong he was. But at that moment, I imagine he was rejoicing, like, finally, I got one over on the Father. And the next statement he said was, I thirst. He knew that his mission was done. Scripture says that much right before he said this statement. But he said this statement to fulfill Psalm 22 that said, his tongue sticks to the roof of his mouth. That's a phrase for saying, I'm extremely thirsty, which would have been a cause of his intense blood loss. And the final two statements. Immediately after simply tasting the sour wine mixture that they would have given him, he said, it is finished. You see, many see this as a defeat cry, saying, it is finished, I'm done, I give up. But it's not, it is a victory cry. He's saying, it is finished. The debt of sin is finished. The old covenant is finished. Prophecy is finished. My suffering here is finished. You are now restored. And then he said, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit, and it says he breathed his last. Now, for those 7 statements to remember, while he's talking, he had to hold himself up. It was causing him intense pain just to say those statements. And after he gave up his spirit again, God made himself known. There was a great earthquake that terrified the Roman soldiers who were there. The veil in the temple was torn in two, which symbolizes that God is not only for the elect priests anymore. God is now open for anyone who wants to come to him. Imagine being the priest in the temple when that happened. The holy veil just tore asunder, top to bottom. Imagine how terrified they would have been. They would have seen that as God judging them for something. They weren't sure what, but something, because they didn't see killing Jesus as being bad. And something else happened that Matthew records that I don't think is talked about very often. It says that when that happened, the saints were resurrected, but they did not come out of the cemetery until Jesus was resurrected, and then they went into Jerusalem. A lot of people don't mention that. So imagine being in Jerusalem, Jesus just died, and you go to the cemetery and you see a bunch of dead people walking around perfectly renewed. Like, I'd be so confused. I would think that was like the end of the world. And on top of that, whenever Jesus returned from the dead, they all left the cemetery too to go into Jerusalem and be witnessed by many. Now, it was at this moment that the priest ran to Pilate and begged him, please kill these men faster. Passover is about to begin. The Sabbath is about to begin, because Sabbath was on Saturday, the next day. And they were worried that if they were left up there and died on Passover, it would have been unclean, because you cannot have dead displayed during Passover. So Pilate said, okay, break their legs. So the soldiers came and broke the 2 criminals' legs, which would have robbed them of the ability to pull themselves up to breathe, so they would have asphyxiated. But whenever they came to Jesus, he was already gone. He was already dead. Whenever they reported that back to Pilate, he was surprised. He could not believe that he died in only 6 hours. So instead of breaking his legs, which again fulfills prophecy because it says not a bone will be broken, they pierced him through with a spear, which shows, again, the medical depiction of the spear going through and straight into the heart. And whenever it got pulled back out, it says blood and water poured out, which is actually a medical condition, and it shows that he would have been dead for at least 30 minutes before this. And on top of that, church tradition says that when the blood splashed on the Roman soldier's eyes, beforehand he was essentially blind, hard to see, but as soon as that blood hit him, he could see again. And it says that the Roman soldiers there fell down and said, surely this was the Son of God, surely he was innocent. At that moment, it took Jesus' death for them to believe and have faith. So that brings us to the big question. Why? What sane person would be willing to put themselves through all of that torture, all of that pain, all that suffering, all that betrayal? One, it was because he had to fulfill prophecy. There's roughly 27 prophecies about the passion of the Christ, and he fulfilled every single one. Second is to reestablish us to the Father. Remember, the first Adam separated all of mankind, completely severing any relationship we might have or any hope we might have. So Jesus emptied himself and came down as a human with the distinct mission to go through all of that just to reconnect us to the Father, to give us a chance. He took all of mankind's sin upon him, the sin of the whole world, past, present, future. And that's important because even if you were the only person still living, he would have still done that just for you. He had you on his mind just as much as he had anyone. Think about that for a second. The creator of the universe came down, went through all of that torture, not just for everybody, but for you, specifically you. He was willing to do that because he loved you that much. And that brings me to the final point of why, and it's because of how much he loves us. I know that this is not a topic easily discussed. It makes people squeamish. People don't like hearing how much torture he would have gone through. Makes people feel uncomfortable. I don't want to think about all of that. I just want to think about the feel-good feeling. Jesus is my Lord. Yes, he died for me. But do you understand what he went through? Do you understand why he went through it? It should make you uncomfortable because we don't deserve that. We don't deserve that kind of love, and yet he still did it for us. So with all of that, I want us to go forward today. Just remember. Remember what he did for us. How brutal it was, and yet he still did it. God bless.